Those were the only two public comment speaking requests I got on that item. Ms. Gray, what would you like to do with it?
Well, I think the purpose in pulling any of the items is really... I think the purpose in me pulling any of these items is really to have a discussion with the council about these particular issues. Mr. Rentz brought up a good point. I mean, we should have some dialogue on some of the issues. I would like to know whether or not the council, any of the council members, have any comments relative to the issues that I asked to be pulled.
Well, I can't imagine how you could talk about significant impact under the law without being able to take into account cumulative effects. That's just me. Maybe some people could, of course, but I don't see how you do that. And if that's consistent with the CEQA approach now, hard to imagine we wouldn't use it. I'm not opposed to telling Joe, look at the language, talk to people, see if there's things consistent with our general approach in the Delta plan that you might want to do, but
And to be honest, this language really came from the attorneys, so it was a technical change. I am not an expert in CEQA and technical language here. They told me, well, it's and it says here a technical clarification to the language.
And it is an analysis that people do in California every day, and they do CEQA compliance documents. They're able to approve a conditional use permit for a liquor store in a commercial zone without having to assess the impacts of every liquor store in all of California and alcohol consumption back to the invention of bourbon. People make common sense applications of these standards all the time in California, and this is just to make sure that the standard we use is consistent with the standard that's applied in law all the time.
Will we have a box on bourbon and water?
Done.
I would just say though, but it depending upon how common sense the application, I would agree with you, Dan. But I've also seen enough documents over time that this cumulative, when it comes to, I use some examples, traffic analysis and so forth, it can, depending upon the nature of either intervention and or attention that's given to any particular proposal, it certainly can add time, cost, and increase the paperwork by multiples of hundreds of pages in some cases, because people say that you need to do the cumulative analysis about not necessarily back to the invention of bourbon, but going back a ways or project forward what's going to happen. And so, depending upon who's engaged in that process, I mean, because there are folks who are smart, they're either have good legal background or they know other ways to challenge. It can, and I've seen it on occasions when it's added significant time and effort and cost to projects because the common sense was initially applied by staff, but others saw common sense as being much broader than the context it was being applied in. So, but I know that's what the law calls for, the cumulative impact. So.
If you'd like us to look at the language, we will look at it.
How about we just direct staff, and that include Mr. Siegel, who's one of those attorneys who looks at non-attorneys seriously and substantially, to tinker with the language if appropriate.
That's fine.
Yes.
Okay.
And I should point out there are two ways that you could address this. One is by defining significant impact the way CEQA does, or in a different way than CEQA does, to be less inclusive. The other is, which is I think is more the approach that you've taken, is in your policies themselves you've made the exclusions. So you have a broader net in terms of meeting this one of these first four criteria. But when it comes to the fifth criteria of a policy, you have a higher bar before something comes within the policy. So there are two different ways you could tackle this.
Okay. All right. Well, you've got tinkering authority on that, Mr. Grindstaff. On page 1 at the bottom, item number 107, Ms. Marcus pulled this off. This was one of my things. Let me tell you what I had suggested in a comment to staff, both in regards to page 85, which is the section on California's water infrastructure, and a separate discussion on storage. I thought not included in the discussion with the problems of finding adequate storage sites 160 years after we've started as a state. And this grows out of my experience. Everywhere I go, everyone says, why don't you build more dams and we'll have more water? And it takes a long time to get into discussion. You say, well, you got to find the right place. It has to have the right configuration of property. If there are high walls on either side, which people want, is it a small gap that can be closed? Are there other problems with it? The difficulty of it. Randy and I have chatted about this before. And the Diamond Valley may have been the last really significant open area reservoir that we're going to find, and the projects in the future that are storage are both underground and things like the Los Vaqueros expansion, existing storage built higher for greater capacity. And I just thought that the staff narrative language ought to reference a little bit the complexities of finding that. Only because when people say that, they usually mean somebody should pay for more storage, not me. And I think we've got to carefully calculate what's involved. You look at the options DWR is studying now on the storage facility. These are not gigantic facilities generating vast amounts of net water. These
They're
are
still big facilities.
and they may actually be ones you want to do, but they don't come cheap in any way. So that was my suggestion. Council's free to do what they want with it.
I would agree. That's why we have the second recommendation regarding storage to assess the potential for local projects that could be a combination of flood control and water storage and water quality benefits. Leading up to that particular recommendation, certainly additional narrative might be appropriate.